Victoria stood frozen as she stared at the photo on her phone. Her boyfriend, James, kissing her best friend. Her heart tightened, anger and betrayal bubbling inside her. But she didn't cry. No, she had a better idea. She would make him jealous, and she'd make sure he felt the sting of her revenge. She looked around the bustling market in Lagos, Nigeria, where she and her stepbrother, Royal, had come to buy supplies for the weekend barbecue. The air was alive with the aroma of sizzling street food and the hum of vendors calling out their goods. Spotting a young man near a fabric stall, Victoria strode over with determination. "Hey," she said with a coy smile. "Can I ask you a favor?" The man blinked, unsure but intrigued. "What kind of favor?" "Just a quick photo," she said, holding up her phone. "I need to make someone jealous." The man chuckled nervously but agreed. Victoria leaned in close, and just as they were about to pose for the kiss, Royal appeared out of nowhere. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked, snatching the phone from her hand. The man took one look at Royal's stern expression and he bolted. "Royal, you scared him off," Victoria snapped, trying to grab her phone back. Royal frowned, scrolling through her photos until he saw the incriminating picture of James. His jaw tightened. "That idiot cheated on you. With your best friend." Victoria crossed her arms, glaring at him. "What does it matter to you?" Royal's gaze softened slightly. "It matters because you deserve better." Before she could respond, Royal pulled her close, tilting her face toward him. "If you want to make him jealous, do it right." Without warning, he kissed her, deep and deliberate. Victoria's heart raced, partly from shock and partly from something she couldn't quite name. The shutter clicked, capturing the intimate moment. When Royal pulled away, he smirked. "There, that'll do it." Stunned, Victoria stared at the photo. It looked so real, so passionate. She sent it to James with a short message. "I've moved on. Don't bother calling." James showed up the next day, pounding on the door of Victoria's family's grand estate. She was too embarrassed to face him, especially with her mother nearby, so she came up with an excuse. "I'm busy. Go home, James." But James wasn't deterred. His persistence led him to Royal, lounging by the pool. "So, you're the guy," James said, his voice dripping with disdain. Royal didn't even look up from his drink. "And you're the idiot who cheated. What do you want?" Victoria, panicked, rushed to the pool. "Royal, stop antagonizing him." Royal grinned mischievously, grabbed her arm, and pulled her into the pool. She shrieked, sputtering as she surfaced. "Relax," he teased, "you're too uptight. You're impossible," Victoria yelled, shoving him. Their playful banter quickly turned serious when Royal cornered her by the pool wall, his eyes locking with hers. "You think I'm just messing around?" he asked, his tone low and serious. Before she could answer, the sound of her mother's voice cut through the moment. "What's going on out here?" Victoria's face turned crimson as she scrambled out of the pool. But Royal, he simply leaned back, completely unbothered, a smirk playing on his lips. A few weeks earlier, when Victoria first moved into the luxurious estate with her mother, she had despised every moment of it. Her mother's new marriage to the wealthy William uprooted her life, dragging her from her small-town comfort to this extravagant, unfamiliar world. And then there was Royal. The first time they met, he had smirked at her. "So, you're the country girl with a boy's name, huh?" She glared at him, already irritated. "And you're the spoiled brat who thinks he owns the place." Their interactions were no better from there. His teasing and her fiery comebacks were constant. But now, as they stood dripping by the pool, something had shifted. Victoria wasn't sure what to make of the change. But one thing was certain, life in this new home was anything but predictable. As the sun dipped below the horizon in the sprawling city of Nairobi, Victoria stood outside the lavish villa, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. The evening air was warm, but her temper was hotter. She couldn't shake the sting of humiliation from being abandoned on the deserted road. Royal had simply left her there, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Jerk," she muttered under her breath as she stepped inside the villa. The house was alive with the sound of laughter and music. Men and women dressed in expensive casual wear mingled effortlessly, drinks in hand. It wasn't her scene, but she couldn't ignore the curiosity that tugged at her. She wanted to see who Royal really was when no one was watching. Victoria froze when she spotted him in the far corner of the room, surrounded by women. He leaned back in a leather chair, a cigarette dangling lazily from his fingers. A glass of whiskey sat on the table beside him. His charm was magnetic, the women laughing at every word he said. So, this was the perfect son, she thought bitterly. The golden boy her mother couldn't stop praising was nothing more than a womanizer and a smoker. Her anger bubbled over when she caught sight of him pouring tequila over a laughing woman's chest before taking a shot. Disgusted, she stormed past the crowd and into the dimly lit hallway leading to the restroom. Royal was caught off guard when she cornered him outside the bathroom. Before he could speak, her fist connected with his jaw. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Victoria snapped, her voice shaking with anger. Royal rubbed his jaw, his smirk intact despite the pain. "Well, hello to you too. Didn't know you had that kind of fire in you." "Fire," she hissed. "You left me stranded on the side of the road. You're a selfish, arrogant." "Careful, sis," he interrupted, leaning in closer. "You're starting to sound like you care." "I don't," she shot back, her cheeks flushing. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'll admit leaving you there wasn't my finest moment. But you don't exactly make it easy to get along, do you?" "You're unbelievable," she said, turning to leave. Before she could walk away, he grabbed her wrist, his expression softening. "All right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have left you out there." Victoria yanked her hand free, glaring at him. "Sorry doesn't fix it." As she returned to the main room, Jenna, one of Royal's friends, approached her. The tall, confident woman gave Victoria a knowing smile. "You look like you could use a drink," Jenna said, handing her a glass of Coke. Victoria hesitated but took it. "Thanks." Jenna looped her arm around Victoria's shoulders. "Don't let Royal get to you. He's complicated, but he's harmless." Victoria snorted. "Harmless? You don't know him like I do." "Oh, I know him well enough," Jenna said with a laugh. "Trust me, he's more bark than bite." As Jenna led her around the villa, introducing her to a few people, Victoria started to relax. That is, until one of the gang leaders, a broad-shouldered man named Ronnie, sent over one of his men with another drink. "This is from Ronnie," the man said, placing a fresh glass in her hand. Victoria glanced at Jenna nervously, but Jenna shrugged. "It's just Coke. Relax." She took a cautious sip, but before she could put the glass down, Royal appeared, shoving the henchman aside. "Get lost," Royal growled, knocking the glass from Victoria's hand. "What's your problem?" Victoria snapped, glaring at him. Royal's eyes darted to Ronnie, who was watching them closely. "You shouldn't be drinking anything from him." "I don't need you to protect me," she said, her voice rising. Royal ignored her, his gaze locked on Ronnie. "Stay away from her," he warned. The tension in the room was palpable, but Ronnie merely smirked, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, Royal, she's all yours." Victoria's face burned with humiliation as the crowd around them erupted in laughter. Furious, she stormed out of the villa, Royal hot on her heels. "Victoria, wait," he called. She spun around to face him. "What do you want, Royal?" "To embarrass me even more." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You don't know these people like I do. Ronnie's dangerous. I'm just trying to keep you safe." "I didn't ask for your help," she said, her voice trembling. Royal sighed, his frustration evident. "Maybe not, but you've got it anyway." She stared at him for a moment, unsure whether to yell at him or thank him. Before she could decide, he turned and walked back into the villa, leaving her alone under the Nairobi night sky. Victoria sat in the back seat of Royal's car, her head leaning heavily against the window as they sped away from the chaotic villa. The dizziness she felt earlier hadn't subsided, her mind a haze. Her fingers clutched at Royal's arm as he helped her into the house, her voice faint. "Don't leave," she murmured, her fear of the dark slipping past her guarded exterior. Royal paused, his brow furrowing at the vulnerability in her tone. "You're safe," he assured her, his voice unusually gentle as he carried her upstairs. Her hand lightly brushed against the muscles of his arm as he placed her on the bed. "You're not all bad," she said sleepily, her words surprising even herself. Royal didn't reply. Instead, he dimmed the lights and pulled a blanket over her. As he left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. The following night, Victoria found herself drawn to Royal in ways she couldn't understand. She had always seen him as arrogant, but there was a mystery about him that was hard to ignore. She found herself spying on him, watching him change, surf at night, and mingle with people she barely knew. It wasn't long before the city's underground racing scene pulled them both into its orbit. The field was packed with roaring engines and flashing headlights. Members of rival gangs gathered to watch the event, the tension palpable. Royal, as usual, exuded confidence as he prepared for the race. Victoria, dressed in a short skirt and a high ponytail, made her way to the front row. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. Royal caught sight of her and faltered for a moment, delaying his start. As the race began, Royal's rival miscalculated a turn, giving him the chance to overtake and secure a lead. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Victoria's attention was elsewhere. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Her heart sank as she opened the image. James, her ex, kissing her former best friend. Anger surged through her. She turned to the nearest bystander, a young man, and grabbed his arm. "Kiss me," she demanded, holding up her phone. The man hesitated, but before anything could happen, Royal appeared, his face dark with anger. "Get out of here," he barked at the stranger, shoving him aside. "What are you doing?" Victoria snapped. Royal grabbed her arm, "Making sure you don't do something stupid." He pulled her toward his car, his grip firm but not harsh. "If you want to make him jealous, I'll help you. But not like this." Before she could protest, he kissed her. It was quick but deliberate, and when he pulled away, he smirked. "There, that'll do the trick." Victoria was too stunned to respond as Royal walked away, leaving her to process what had just happened. The night wasn't over. Another gang leader, Ronnie, pulled up next to Royal's car, revving his engine provocatively. He rang the bell signaling the start of another race. Royal wasn't ready. Still disheveled, he stumbled out of the villa, shouting, "Hold on." But Ronnie wasn't listening. Victoria, frustrated and impulsive, climbed into Royal's car. The thrill of the engine roaring to life sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. "Victoria, what are you doing?" Royal shouted, running toward her. She smirked. "Winning." The gunshot signaling the start of the race echoed through the night. Victoria accelerated, her instincts sharp from years of watching her rally driver father. She quickly gained the upper hand, maneuvering through the twists and turns of the course. But Ronnie didn't play fair. When he fell behind, he rammed the back of her car, causing it to swerve. Victoria gritted her teeth, refusing to lose control. When she crossed the finish line, the crowd erupted in cheers. But Ronnie wasn't about to admit defeat. "You cheated," he yelled, pointing at Victoria. "This was supposed to be between me and Royal. A woman wasn't part of the deal." Royal stepped forward, his expression dark. "Back off, Ronnie. She won fair and square." Ronnie smirked. "Fine, but if you want to avoid a war, you'll pay up." The tension was thick as Royal handed over the bet, $15,000. Victoria watched silently, her victory overshadowed by the politics of the gangs. As the crowd dispersed, she approached Royal. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. He shrugged, his usual smirk returning. "You won, but keeping the peace is more important. Next time, stay out of it." Victoria bristled at his tone but said nothing. As they drove home, the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Neither of them could deny the growing connection, but both were too stubborn to acknowledge it. The tension in the villa was palpable as Victoria tightened her grip on the keys to the Porsche, her eyes narrowing at Ronnie. She wasn't about to let him leave with his head held high after everything. Stepping forward, she let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Maybe next time, Ronnie, try not to lose to a woman," she taunted, her voice carrying across the field. Ronnie's face darkened as he hurled an insult at her, crude and demeaning. The words struck a nerve, not just with Victoria but with Royal, who had been standing quietly by the car. "Say that again," Royal growled, stepping up to Ronnie. Before anyone could intervene, Royal threw a punch that landed squarely on Ronnie's jaw. Chaos erupted as punches and shouts filled the air. Members of both gangs jumped into the fray, turning the scene into an all-out brawl. Victoria, her bravado replaced with fear, crouched down behind the car, her heart pounding. The sounds of fists connecting and bodies hitting the ground took her back to memories she had buried deep, her father's violent outbursts, her mother's tears, and her own silent cries for help. Jenna spotted Victoria and hurried over, grabbing her by the arm. "Come on, you can't stay here," Jenna said urgently, pulling her toward the car. Royal, hearing Jenna's call, broke away from the fight and sprinted toward the Porsche. Without a word, he jumped into the driver's seat and started the car. Victoria barely had time to buckle her seatbelt before they sped off into the night, leaving the chaos behind. But Ronnie wasn't the type to let things go. Victoria could feel it in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't over. Royal had been distant for days. Victoria noticed his absence but didn't ask questions. She had bigger worries, like Ronnie and the inevitable fallout from that night. When Royal finally returned, it was late, and the house was quiet. He looked exhausted, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes heavy with something she couldn't quite place. Victoria was sprawled on the couch with the dog, watching a late-night race on TV. She glanced at him as he entered the room. "Rough week?" she asked, her tone light but curious. He sank into the seat beside her, his gaze fixed on the screen. "You could say that," she nodded toward the TV. "Think you could handle those turns?" Royal smirked, his usual confidence shining through. "Easily." "You're wrong," she said, her tone teasing. "You have to pull the handbrake, turn the wheel 20 degrees to the right, then immediately swing it 60 degrees to the left." He raised an eyebrow at her. "And you're the expert now. Don't forget, I grew up with a rally driver," she said, her lips curving into a smile. The banter softened the tension between them. Without thinking, Royal leaned closer, his gaze locking onto hers. The kiss that followed was hesitant at first, but it deepened, their shared emotions breaking through the surface. They both knew it was wrong, but neither could pull away. The sound of her mother's car pulling into the driveway brought them back to reality. Victoria quickly straightened, her face flushed as she fumbled for the remote. The next morning, Rafaela noticed Victoria's mood had lifted. Mistaking it for something else, she decided to surprise her daughter. "Victoria," Rafaela said brightly, walking into the living room. "I have a surprise for you." Victoria froze when she saw Dan, her ex, standing in the doorway. The sight of him made her stomach turn. "Rafa, what's he doing here?" Victoria asked, her voice strained. "He's here to apologize," Rafaela said, oblivious to her daughter's discomfort. Dan stepped forward, his expression contrite. "Victoria, I made a mistake. I missed you so much, and I wasn't thinking clearly. That kiss with your friend meant nothing." Royal, who had been leaning against the kitchen counter, scoffed loudly. "That's the lamest excuse I've ever heard," he said, walking into the room. Before Dan could respond, Royal, accidentally, spilled water onto him. Dan sputtered in outrage while Victoria smirked, her anger giving way to amusement. "You should leave, Dan," Victoria said coldly. "We're done." Dan hesitated but finally nodded, his shoulders slumping as he left the house. Victoria turned to Royal. "Thanks for that," she said softly. "Anytime," he replied with a grin. The moment was short-lived. From the second-floor balcony, Rafaela called out sharply, "Royal! Get up here now." Victoria's heart sank as she exchanged a glance with Royal. Whatever was coming next, she had feeling it wouldn't end well. The moon cast an eerie glow over the sprawling compound as Royal climbed up to the rooftop, his shirt stained with blood and dirt. His jaw throbbed, and his ribs ached, but his focus remained on the person lying peacefully under the canopy of stars, Victoria. Her chest rose and fell softly, her features relaxed for the first time in days. But as Royal drew closer, his gaze fell on a thin scar on her abdomen, partially revealed by her shifted blouse. It wasn't a fresh wound, but it told a story he didn't know. Carefully, he reached out to pull the blanket over her, but she stirred. Mistaking him for an intruder, Victoria sat up abruptly and swung her fist. It connected with his already bruised cheek. "Damn it, Victoria," Royal groaned, holding his face. "Royal," she gasped, realizing her mistake. She scrambled to her knees, reaching for his face. "What happened to you? Why are you covered in blood?" He winced as her fingers grazed his cheek. "I ran into Ronnie's goons. They sent a message, stay out of their business." Her expression hardened. "This is because of me, isn't it?" "Don't flatter yourself," he said, trying to inject some humor, but her concern didn't waver. She grabbed the first aid kit from the corner of the rooftop and began cleaning his wounds. Her hands were gentle yet firm, her silence heavy with unspoken words. "You shouldn't go out alone anymore," Royal said softly, breaking the quiet. "Ronnie's watching you." Her hand faltered on his skin, her eyes meeting his. "Why? What does he want from me?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not taking any chances." Her hand lingered on his arm, her touch sending a spark through both of them. Slowly, their faces drew closer, the tension between them building. Just as their lips were about to meet, the sound of someone clearing their throat broke the moment. It was Dan. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his tone laced with bitterness. Victoria pulled back immediately, her face flushing with guilt and frustration. Royal, on the other hand, looked completely unfazed. "You're always interrupting," Royal said, his voice dry. Dan ignored him, turning to Victoria. "I just came to say goodbye. I know I messed up, and there's no fixing this. Take care of yourself." He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Victoria feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The following days were a whirlwind. Victoria tried to distract herself with part-time work and school, but the threatening letters kept arriving. Each one was more sinister than the last. She began to withdraw from Royal, the memories of his violent tendencies reminding her too much of her father. The realization that he thrived on danger made her question their connection. Royal noticed the change but didn't push her. Instead, he went to his father, seeking answers. That's when he learned the full truth about Victoria's past. Her father had been released from prison, and there was reason to believe he was behind the letters. Victoria's testimony had been instrumental in his conviction, and he was out for revenge. "You need to protect her, Royal," his father said gravely. "Her safety is your responsibility now." Victoria had no idea about the storm brewing around her. She avoided Royal at every turn, focusing instead on her newfound independence. But her resolve was tested one fateful day when a girl from her class, jealous of her closeness to Royal, locked her in a storage closet. Panic set in immediately as the darkness surrounded her. Memories of her father's violent outbursts flooded her mind, his raised voice, the knife in his hand, and the fear that had consumed her childhood. She screamed, pounding on the door until her fists ached. On the other side, Royal heard her cries. "Victoria," he shouted, kicking the door down without hesitation. She stumbled into his arms, trembling and tear-streaked. I thought he was here," she whispered, clutching his shirt. "He's not here," Royal assured her, his voice firm yet soothing. "I won't let him hurt you." He carried her home, her weight light against his strong frame. As they entered the house, she glanced up at him, her fear momentarily replaced by gratitude. But the looming shadow of her past wasn't gone, it was just waiting to strike. And as much as Victoria wanted to push Royal away, she knew she needed him now more than ever. As the morning sun cast its golden glow over the quiet coastal town, Royal sat on the porch, staring at the distant waves crashing against the shore. He had barely slept since rescuing Victoria from the chaos of the night before. The events replayed in his mind like a broken record, the car chase, the gunshots, and the moment Jonas met his end. Victoria's footsteps broke his reverie. She approached him slowly, a blanket draped over her shoulders and a warm cup of tea in her hands. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly, sitting beside him. He shook his head, his jaw tight. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you in that car, with him holding a gun to your head." She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "It's over now. Jonas is gone, and Ronnie's back in jail. You saved me. Royal turned to her, his eyes searching hers. I couldn't save you from everything. Not from the fear or the pain he caused you. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder. You've done more for me than anyone else ever has. But Royal, we can't keep doing this. His heart sank. He knew what was coming, but hearing the words still cut deep. My mother and your father, she continued, they'll never understand. And I don't want to ruin what little peace we've found. He took a deep breath, nodding. I know, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the waves their only company. That evening, they decided to have one final moment together. They drove to the beach, the same spot where they had first shared a kiss under the moonlight. The night was clear, the stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across the sky. Royal brought out a small speaker, playing a soft tune that drifted over the sound of the waves. They danced barefoot on the sand, their laughter mixing with the music. I'll never forget this, Victoria said, her voice trembling. Neither will I, Royal replied, his hands tightening around her waist as if holding on to the moment itself. When dawn broke, they parted with a lingering kiss, their hearts heavy but resolute. Months passed. Victoria threw herself into her studies, determined to leave the pain of the past behind. Royal stayed away, respecting her wishes but keeping an unspoken promise to protect her from afar. One evening, as Victoria sat on her dorm room balcony, a small box arrived at her doorstep. Inside was a single seashell and a note in Royal's unmistakable handwriting. Every wave brings the shell back to shore, no matter how far it drifts. Royal. She held the shell to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She knew they couldn't be together now, but a part of her believed their story wasn't over. In another part of the city, Royal stood on a rooftop, watching the stars. He had no regrets. Loving Victoria, even for a short while, had been worth every risk. Though they were apart, their hearts were tethered by the unbreakable bond of their shared memories. And somewhere deep inside, they both knew that life, in its mysterious way, might bring them together again. The end, or perhaps, the beginning of something new. Thank you so much, my amazing family, for watching. Kindly like this story if you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories, and please share it with your friend and loved. Thank you and God bless you.